Welcome back, ladies and gents, to GuyShrink, the podcast where we talk about what keeps a guy awake at night. Or in today's episode, what ought to keep a guy awake at night. I got three other guests with me today. Three guys that are really good friends, and we're going to talk about why a guy should think about the way he thinks. What's the logical consequences of the way I think? Now, in, so to speak, philosophical circles, the big name for that is called epistemology. So my guests today are three guys that have been on GuyShrink before, two as guests, and one who's here every session. And one of my guests is Tim Lusch, who lives in Cleveland. He's a, I don't know, retired prosecuting attorney, I guess I could call it that. But he's an author, a published author. Well, let me just say that he's part of my conscience. He does a good job of being my conscience. Another buddy, Chris Niebaur, who calls himself a counsel professor, a cognitive neuropsychologist, right? I've known Chris and his wife for many, many years. And Chris is going to help us figure out why a guy should think about his thinking. And then Jordan Valdiviez, who's with us every episode. He's our engineer and our producer today. And he's also going to be the voice of reason. Talking.
That's right.
You're going to do a great job because the three of us have got some experience that you can help us sort out as to how a guy your age is thinking about this. So, well, gentlemen, why is it so important for a guy to think about the way he thinks?
Well, coming from a neuroscience perspective, it's kind of shocking when we get into how the brain believes. And it's not at all like we think it is. So how we think isn't how we think. And many of our thoughts, if not most, aren't even our own thoughts. And so we dive into this and it gets pretty scary. But when you look at the neuroscience of it, there's a whole bunch of really interesting research that shows the left brain generates and maintains our beliefs, and the right brain can update those beliefs if they get too far off what we might call the reality track. But some of the most fascinating stuff came from the split brain patients, which is exactly what it sounds like. They split the brain of one of these individuals, so the left and right sides are no longer communicating. And then they would give kind of bizarre messages to the right brain. Now, remember, the left brain speaks. So if I give a message to the left brain that says, raise your hand, they would raise their hand. But here's the trick. And this is kind of getting into the rabbit hole of beliefs in epistemology. When they would ask the patient, they would say, well, why did you raise your hand? And the brain is cross-wired. So the right brain controls the left hand. And so it got this message, raise your hand. So they did it. Now, the left brain is clueless why this just happened. It's totally in the dark. But it generates language, and here's the really important thing. It generates a plausible explanation for what's going on, a belief in what's going on. And the patient made something up. They said, I was sitting here for a long time, and I just had to stretch. Totally not accurate. So that's one scary thing about how we think. But it's even scarier. The second part, I think, is even scarier. So the brain just confabulates. It makes things up. But the really scary thing is we don't know that the brain is making these things up. So when you ask, why should we think about how we think? Well, it's not how we think we think. The science story is completely different than how we think we think. So if we just go intuitively on this and go, well, of course, I just generate thoughts and ponder the reality. No, your brain is spontaneously making things up. And you have very little control over this.
That's a kind of a scary idea, Chris.
Yeah, not to open up with something a little bit.
Yeah, right. Thanks about
Yeah, you go like existential right away. Like,
so Tim, why should a guy think about his thinking?
I think Chris hit on it. I think, every day we're confronted with our perceptions and the world around us, whether we call it reality or whatever, just whatever's happening around us. And and you hear often, perception is reality. I mean, and how men particularly respond to something. And so we're driven by how we might feel about it or what we think about it or the self-talk. A lot of men, we all know there's a self-talk that goes on in there and that's automatic too. In my experience, I find. And I think, to stay rooted in reality is not only a key to just living a successful and a full life, but I think it's important to, be able to extract any kind of meaning out of life is to be grounded in reality and to subject, our minds, our experiences to scrutiny on a daily basis or hourly basis is the way to do that. Because if I'm in my own head for long enough, I'll believe a lot of crazy stuff, and epistemology becomes epistophomology because, I'll sit around, I'll get angry about something And, and my wife will say, you have no idea if that's what's going on. You're already 10 miles down the road in your perceptions. And so it's just a bad way to live, but it also, I think, deprives us, and men especially, of, the meaning that you extract out of life. And we all want to, accomplish our goals or live a certain kind of life or emulate someone or whatever. And these things aren't possible if we're not, rooted in reality. And looking at our thinking, honestly, which I think a lot of men would just say, what do you mean thinking about thinking? But, if we don't really examine that, and especially not in like a therapeutic language kind of way, like an infomercial kind of way, but certainly in a more philosophical way. Not that it's more masculine or manly, but in a way that really does scrutinize for truth, truth being the end. And I think that's where a lot of men go wrong, because we see it, either therapy or just living in our head, and I think this path is, the one where you can be on solely or with others, but always, subjecting your mind and the world around you to scrutiny. And I think that leads to better results for a man.
Okay. Well, Tim's been telling me for years, Roman, when you're in your own head, you're in a bad neighborhood. You better get out of it, kind of thing. But I do want to circle back, though. Eventually in our conversation, you talked about truth, and you talked about meaning, and you talked about reality. And to me, all of these things are cooked up here somewhere. So, Jordan, what's so important about, a young man like you? Think about your thinking. What's so important about that?
Yeah, I guess when I thinking about my thinking, it seems like everyone has at least two modes. There's the automatic mode, which is like, just, your circle you're with, how you were raised, your culture. And then there's, this other mode that you can get into that I think we're all invited into by those that have gone before us, good friends, mentors, people that are more intelligent than us. Like you're talking about, like you're in Tim's relationships. I think when we were part of community that's healthy, we're invited to think and to dissect our thoughts differently. Like religion does this to a certain degree. Education, universities, institutions are supposed to do this to a certain degree. So I think I feel like pursuit of truth is part of that, right? So it's like, to even get into the mode of thinking about your thinking, there's this whole, world that you can pursue to do that. But it's tough because, that natural automatic place that our minds go to is way more comfortable. So I feel like the more we can spend time gaining like a facility of thinking about our thinking, pursuing truth, then the more we can have a clearer like view on the world. Because it seems like, it's like an asymptotic expression where it's like we are constantly getting it clearer. We never necessarily arrive at the 100% view, but everyone's kind of making incremental improvements on what reality looks like. Yeah.
Okay. All three of you, for me personally, have been, you've really helped me a lot to think better, because I get ideas generated from you guys when I talk, but I also get critique, I get a critique, especially from Tim. But this is good because it sharpens one's thinking, because you're in communication with another set of ideas. And Jordan, you said something about institutions. My experience is institutions aren't doing a very good job these days of helping us to think.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, it's like to a certain degree, institutions always make people think differently. And it's like there's some non-zero level of that. But then it's like, when institutions become radicalized, or when they, I don't know, it just seems like the free speech places are turning more into like religious institutions, and that those have like, strict doctrines that if you don't adhere to, you get punished and you get sent to hell. So
you get canceled is what happens.
Yeah, that's the current definition of hell these days. Like 100 years ago, hell was like super real to everybody. Now it's like canceling is the new hell. Like you go there and you whatever, like philosophically at least.
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about what might be some of the logical conclusions of thinking. And here I'm going to bring an example of a former canceled professor. A former professor got canceled that I just become acquainted with a little bit of his writings. And some of you guys, Chris, you know this guy better than the rest of us. Peter Boghossian, who's taught at Portland State, right, or University of Portland in Oregon. And he's got this thing called street epistemology, which I find to be very interesting, where he actually talks to people on the street, asks them about, I think he asks them about their belief system, and then he says, well, how'd you get there? And he's kind of amazed at the answers that he gets. So let's talk a little bit about Peter for a minute and his contribution to this idea about street epistemology and why it's so important to think about the way you think. So, Chris, what do you know about this guy?
Yeah, so it's true that the left brain generates beliefs and maintains those beliefs, and it's very resistant to new information, but the right brain is open to new ideas. And when I say that, these new ideas usually come from conversation. And so people conversing, particularly with different ideas, it's not only fundamental to understanding how we think, but it's also the foundation of science. And so, science has always been some belief, it gets challenged, and then there's a paradigm shift, and then that belief is held for. So it's always this kind of balance of left brain and what Popper would call maybe normal science, or it wasn't called Popper, but everyone kind of agrees on stuff, and then these anomalies would pop up, these challenges to that, and then it would change, and there'd be a paradigm shift, and would think differently. And that has been a difficult thing at the universities lately. And so we've kind of been in this like left brain echo chamber at the universities. And instead of incorporating new ideas or challenging ideas, and people have heard that first it was comedians got canceled, but then all kinds of speakers got canceled. And what these speakers all had in common was different beliefs, challenging beliefs to the status quo or the current paradigm. And instead of listening to them and having dialogue, they just canceled them. And Peter was one of these professors, and he pretty much had an all-out assault on what was happening at the universities. And first, he was part of him and Lindsay and one other individual. They faked a bunch of papers, and they got a surprising number published in peer-reviewed journals. And they were just made-up nonsense, and yet they all got published. And that was very embarrassing to the universities. Things like, the conceptual penis, and things that just off the charts were
Absolutely.
The conceptual penis.
They were just so funny, and anyone would laugh at them. But the sad thing is they got published. And so I think Peter made a lot of enemies by showing that the system, and then he even came up with this notion of idea laundering, which was able to show how universities with peer-reviewed journals were supposed to be the gold standard. But what they had done is very clever. And, they wanted to come up with ideas that weren't based in science any longer, but how do you make that reputable? Well, a bunch of people get together, they create a journal, and now you can publish your nonsense paper in my journal, and we can call it a peer-reviewed journal. It becomes part of legitimate science. But, in the same way one launders money, it's just, it's like taking illegitimate ideas and getting them into mainstream science. And that, certainly wasn't good for his reputation. So he challenged academia in so many ways he had to resign, because I think it became just too incompatible with his own beliefs, which were to challenge and question. And so he came up with, go ahead.
Well, I guess you call that idea laundering? Is that what you said?
Idea laundering, yeah. So the laundering of ideas rather than money. And it's absolutely it would be interesting to challenge some of these journals, because that's exactly what seemed to happen. And so again, how did they made up this one paper, total nonsense, and it got published in one of the higher end gender studies journals, and they praised it. They thought it was fantastic, and it was made up gibberish. It had no sense to it. And so he was challenging not just modern universities, he was challenging the way we think.
Yeah.
And he was kind of exposing that our thinking is nonsense.
Yeah.
And particularly at the universities. And so it didn't go well, that wasn't met with what you might sometimes
Well, he didn't get a race, that's for sure.
he didn't get a raise.
I want to.
Probably.
I feel like I just wanted to say, like, the funny thing is, I feel like it wasn't just gibberish. It was like he interpreted their like philosophical language and constructed something that was like just seemingly crazy unless you were like already drinking the sauce. But he manufactured their sauce, fed it to them, they ate it up, and then it was like, look, it's insane.
Yeah, it's called the Grievance Studies Affair is what that's called. And James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose, those are the co-conspirators there that put this all together. You know, it's a fascinating critique of academia, but more than that, it's a critique of how we think. How
We're all Trojans.
I don't want to say mob thought, but herd thinking.
Yeah. And we're helpless
100%.
unless we have those around us to challenge us. Our beliefs, humans are extremely susceptible to falling into things like cults, falling into strange belief systems, because we need people to challenge us and call us. And so our right brain anomaly detector, or sometimes called the devil's advocate, a challenge, it's not good in isolation. It needs those around us to challenge us. And that's why he came up with street epistemology, which is just a play on the Socratic method, where people challenge their ideas. But he did some really interesting things within, I don't know if it would work in academia. He's tried it a few times, and you can see some of his videos where there are academic professors flipping him off while he's doing this. So it doesn't
Really?
And just to give you a notion, because from my own experience, I wrote back at the university I was teaching, I wrote the president of the university, and I said, let's get more diverse ideas so we can challenge people's thinking. And they wrote back and said, take your beliefs and just leave our campus.
Oh my gosh.
And so that's pretty explicit evidence that the universities don't want to be challenged.
Yeah.
And that's what sets things up. So, that's what should keep us up at night.
Yeah.
How vulnerable we are when we're not challenged.
Okay. So Chris, you use the phrase Socratic method. Tell our hearers, our listeners, what that means.
It's simply challenging people's fundamental assumptions. And when people use terms, and someone uses the term toxic masculinity, what do you mean by that?
Okay.
And can you explain what the patriarchy? That's an interesting term. Tell me what you mean by that.
Okay, so you're asking them to kind of define their terms a little bit.
Yeah,
Okay.
Which is the foundation of science. It's gone back. Humans have had some irrational moments where we just threw away our need to define. I'm not sure people were defining what a witch was during that whole witch trials thing. They just knew it when they saw it. They just it was.
Potter Stewart said about pornography. I can't define it, but I can tell you what it looks like. But see, Lewis Carroll had that when he wrote Alice in Wonderland. Look through the looking glass. He had the Cheshire Cat saying, "A word means what I want it to mean." That's icky business there.
And again, that all traces back to postmodernism in the 1950s, where any kind of truth, like Tim was talking about truth, and you could see this throughout the university, people became skeptical of truth, which is, yes, skepticism is great, but they misplaced it on truth itself and threw it to the wind. They just said, well, there's just language, and language makes up reality, and it could be multiple realities. And so I think what Peter was doing is trying to get us back on the course correct. Let's get back to realizing we might be wrong, and we can improve our thoughts, and they can mirror reality to a better degree if we get together and converse about them. That's the Socratic method. And of course, we know what happened to his fate for it. But
Rip some hemlock.
But I think Peter has, I don't know if it'll survive at the universities, but he has. If you watch his videos, some of them are very positive. A lot of them are very positive, and he does have a way of creating a very kind of safe space, not to use that phrase, but you can't do this. Like imagine we're going to argue about something, and we can come about it in one or two ways. We can look very combative. We can go, and this is all through the internet now, where people want that gotcha moment. People want the clickbait where, I say something and then you destroy me, and that's not a path to truth. A path to truth is where we work together to try to get to a better version of reality.
Okay, which is one of the reasons why we should think about the way we think. Excuse me, Jordan, I interrupted you.
No, I just said that's the hard part is getting people that actually want to work together and not people that already believe that they have everything, right?
Okay. And, the Socratic method has turned into, are you teachable? Like, in other words, like, instead of having conversation, I'm going to teach you my version of reality, and either you're unteachable or and then there's no place to go with that.
Well, that leads me, at least as we're talking here, then one of Peter's places where he really got tremendous amount of criticism, as I understand it, as well as became a focus of attention for his scholarly attention, was what we now call wokeism. And so what do we know about that?
It probably should keep us up at night.
I think we're pretty familiar with it in practice, if not entirely in theory. I mean, in my view, it's an ideology that inhabits political spaces, religious spaces, private spaces, especially. We've seen that. And, I think it's pernicious for the contradictory views that it espouses, but I think as an ideology, it's that's the real danger. It's part of the many-headed hydra of ideology, and ideologies always serve power, and truth is inconvenient to power. And when you look at human history, truth seekers and the truth has always opposed those that are in power, and want to keep power. And I think when you see an ideology, and certainly as we've seen it with woke, is that you have to ask yourself, whom do they serve? Because that ideology is serving power. And when you can't speak freely, and it's not just a tradition in this country, but it's something that we've evolved, I think, as humans, and countries have varying degrees of free speech, but it's something that certainly with liberalism over the last few hundred years, we've all benefited from. But when you can't speak freely, and in some basic assumptions of human communication and contact and relationship are removed, you're living in a hellish state. It's essentially a totalitarian state, even if it doesn't look like one. Like Soviet Russia was easy because they didn't hide what they were doing mostly. But with woke, it was sort of we want diversity, but the way they defined diversity was very rigid and very narrow, and it wasn't diversity at all. But if you question that, then you were a racist, a sexist, or whatever. And that made it particularly pernicious because that was a way to get and keep control and keep defining and redefining the terms to maintain power. And the only way to dispel that and defeat it is truth, and is hammering away with that truth. And I think it's important for men because it's not just running into woke in the workplace or in academia, because we will, but other ideologies, whatever it is. And it could be, these ideologies that people, embrace, whether it's, the biohackers, that there's a certain way you can live to live forever, and here's what you got to do. And, any of these things that are restrictive in doctrinaire. I think Jordan mentioned there's a religious texture to it. And although it's not true religion, because I think true religion allows for human freedom and allows it flourishing. But I think when you run into that, I think a man has to say, you're going to ask yourself, am I going to be bound by the views of these other people, even unto, slavery and death? Because that's what it amounts to. I mean, at some point, people are going to dictate terms for your life to you for however long. Or do I want to be a free person and a free thinking person? And there will be consequences to that. And it's not the easy path. It's hard work. You're going against the grain, but that's the only way that I think a man can go through his life and still have, find meaning in it and get to the end of the day and live with himself without becoming, a marionette to whatever powers that be.
So you see ideology as being that kind of a thing where I become a marionette or
it's
no thinking required. I got it thought out for you.
It's worse. I mean, it's worse than that in my view, because it diminishes the human. True freedom, when used, properly, and we can debate that, but I mean, true freedom leads to flourishing, right?
Okay.
I mean, we can use our freedom poorly and we can abuse it, and there's bad stuff that comes about. But true, authentic freedom is is something that results in human flourishing. And I think the problem with ideology is that it destroys that. It crushes humanity, especially the spiritual part of humanity.
Well, I want to kind of stick with Peter's thing about wokeism and what are the logical consequences of going down that ideological path. Jordan, what did you want to offer here?
Yeah, I feel like one of the things I would love to hear that I think is in that same vein is your guys' definition of truth. And I think that was kind of teased out to a certain degree in one of the emails, saying that truth, not knowledge, developing the faculty to analyze. So like there's a difference between truth and knowledge or like truth and facts that I, in my, Christian circles, I like to talk about, there's facts and then there's truths, which are, in my kind of subjective definition is like, it's organized facts in a correct context. Because like there's things that can be totally true, in a cultural context, or if you change the context and then that truth is not true or is less true. I don't know. What do you guys think about like defining truth? Because then that kind of leads into this street epistemology, subjectivity versus objectivity conversation.
Well, I know as far as truth goes, I ain't much, but all I ever think about is not a good place to ground truth. Because, my experience is the final criterion of truth is not a very good place to end up. So I'm not saying what truth isn't. It isn't me.
It isn't me. That's a good start.
There's a great quote. I can't remember, drawing a blank on who came up with it. So I'm just going to paraphrase it and claim it as my own. But truth is what's left when, you do away with all beliefs and opinions. And this notion that the brain somehow captures reality, but it does so really imperfectly. It's never going to get it. I mean, think about our senses. I mean, we only perceive an incredibly small fraction of what we know seems to be, or at least seems to be out there. And so our modeling of thinking, our simulation of reality is only going to get so good. And so truth is whatever's out there that
Yes.
exists when I'm not, exists beyond my thoughts.
Yes. This is the fallacy of the democratic process. Let's just vote on it. Yeah. Majority rules, and so therefore the majority has got the corner on truth.
Yeah, and I think for me that you can't define truth. I think truth is what defines, and so you in seeking truth, you're defining terms, you're proving claims or disproving them, and leading to conclusions that you just acknowledge intuitively and cognitively or intellectually and say, well, this is true. And there's some things that might be provisional. I mean, science proves that this is true for now, but instrumentation, technology, method changes that, and we come to realize that this is not true. At one time we thought it was, but it isn't now. And I think truth is not limited to science or philosophy or whatever. I think that, it's where religion does a good job with it generally, is that it's something much broader. And so I think to define it is not really possible. It is, but for me is to say that truth is what defines. And so we have to seek truth in order to find what things mean and find their value and so forth. And I think it's, from a Catholic perspective, and looking, Pilate's famous question, what is truth? And I think that's, on the one hand, you can say, well, he wasn't a follower of Jesus, and of course he's gonna. But I think that's the question, we're all facing. We're all pilots out here saying, well, what is truth? And it's been corrupted in my mind now by things like saying, well, that's your truth. That's my truth. And Bill, you alluded to that by saying, I know it's not whatever I'm subjectively, but I think we hear that. And it's just lunacy to say, well, that's your truth. I mean, you might believe it's true, and I might believe something else is true, which is different. But to say, well, that's
like a nicer way to say that's your opinion, right?
I mean, yeah, right, Jordan.
Exactly. And all you're doing is acknowledging, well, that there's more than one truth, and there isn't. That's not possible. Truth, you may not be able to define it, but truth is a unity. I mean, right? Truth can't contradict itself. And to make a statement like, well, that's your truth, is to subject that statement in itself to an overall truth claim. right? So you're still acknowledging an objective standard of truth that you're subjecting this subjective standard of truth to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's crucial that in looking at it, we don't want to put truth in the box of just facts, but also allow it to be something that is not just knowledge, a collection of sayings or facts or whatever. But
Right.
I wonder if all this thinking about my thinking is giving me a headache. I'm wondering if a way to get at truth is to begin to engage and practice the virtues that perhaps Stoic philosophy brings out. Wisdom and courage and discipline and justice, and to actually make those actions in our lives to see what results in that. Now, we can argue about what each of those mean, but I think that truth is something that is pursued through action, I believe.
I think that's 100%, a part of the, I guess, regimen we all need for like experiencing truth. I wanted to add something to what Tim was saying, because I feel like in my like scouring of the internet and different articles and stuff, I found one paper that was called "The Domains of Truth," and it's this guy. He talks about it's some, I think it was a Harvard professor or something like that. I forget where the paper came from, but this idea of domains of truth is really interesting to me, because obviously you can have a thought that is true, right? Like that it is true that you had this thought, right? But then if we conflate that with a physical truth or a biological truth, then you get into murky waters, because it's like you can have a true thought, and that you can really have that thought, but it takes a certain set of variables to have a true thought translate into a true physical reality, and that's true with lots of different things. But I think specifically like the thing that Boghossian was talking about related to gender, right? It's like you can definitely have a true thought like, man, I really identify with being a female, and it's the belief that this identification or these true feelings and true thoughts translate to a physical reality. And it's like, conflating those two domains seems to be like where the problem is.
That's a great point, Jordan, because if I remember what Peter Boghossian says, is that we've kind of put subjectivity as the anchor for what truth is.
Yeah,
not my feeling or my thought.
Yeah, that's so dangerous. There's a really interesting study where, and it's just this thing called the explanatory gap, where when we try to reflect on our own thoughts, we're cut off from the source in many cases, but we don't know we're cut off. And so they just had a bunch of different products. They were basically all the same. And most people don't know we have a right side preference. So we just like what's on the right. And so they would ask people, like, what do you like? When they'd say, well, they like the one on the right. But when they asked them, they just confabulated stories. They just said, oh, I like the texture, I like the color. Well, none of that's true. That's just made up. And so we're very prone to that, even when it comes to identities. Like we just tell stories about who we think we are. And it doesn't mean that so I get Jordan, like you could say that maybe that's true in the sense that my story is at least true because I created it. So it's like if I write a book, it's like I wrote, but does it, there's that deeper level. Is it a reflection of the external world in this case? And the interesting thing about this study, they told the subjects, they're like, by the way, there's this right, that's why you like it. It's on the right. And I always remember this quote in a paper, they looked at the researchers as if they were mad. Like if no one believed them. Like, so even when we get the true source of, no, here's why you believe this.
Wait, so
interesting you should say that, because the Russian word
only on the right?
Physically on the right, Chris?
Wow.
Yeah.
Because the Russian word for right is pravda, which also means truth in Russian.
Yeah.
Think about this. In Latin, the right hand is dexter. And if I am able to use both hands, I am ambidextrous, two right hands. But if I'm left-handed,
it's the same thing, right?
if
you're right, you're right. But like right and right, I don't know.
So just our language itself. Just think about that.
Yeah.
So some of the logical conclusions of the way we think, we can sometimes we make our subjectivity the anchor of truth, and that well, my opinion or my feeling or whatever, and that's why we should question the way we think, because it can take us down to some bad places.
And we have
I feel like that's the purpose of DAI. It's supposed to be the purpose of DAI, is to like break some of our like cultural, like ingrained tendencies, as like, if there's just a bunch of the same type of person in the room, if you get a different person from a different background, that's supposed to break things up, right? But we made it just about, checking the box and not like the lived experience, because I think there's a ton, like we all look pretty similar here. Like I'm mostly white, we're all white, like, but you brought me in because it's like you have a different lived experience, and that's diversity. If I brought somebody from another country in here, they have a different lived experience, and they have different like thoughts and stuff, perspectives, right? So it's like that's to me the beauty of DEI, but that got like lost.
And now legislated morality is what happened with it.
Yeah, exactly. Which is never good.
And I think, Jordan, I think a lot of people watching this, if you just see DEI, you say, what's wrong with it? It sounds, you got diversity, inclusion, everything looks really nice. But just to back up one of the things Tim was talking about with the power, there's a kind of a dark side to DEI that a lot of people don't know about. And so here I am in the middle, of getting kicked out of different departments. And I ended up in this one department. It was an interdisciplinary department, very common at universities now. We put sociology, anthropology, and I did cognitive science. And one day I went to a meeting, and it's just the end of the year meeting, and they had changed their name to the Department of Diversity and Culture, with their main mission being DEI. And the first thing they did was kick me out because I didn't fit. The irony was admirable. And it's true,
Chris.
I like
we're laughing about it, but
it was a horrible experience. But for a lived experience that is, fun to tell years later.
They forgot about the I part.
And so, it was not very inclusive. And so, like Tim was saying, like there is this kind of nasty part to DEI that no one wants to talk about. And so it must be, I think it's confusing for a lot of people. Like, why is anyone against this? And they don't see that behind it sometimes is power, even though on the surface it looks really, innocent and super beneficial. But at least in my case, it was used absolutely for power.
Yeah. So do you think Peter Boghossian is a good example that we can look to, somebody that kind of got some stuff together as far as standing up for himself without, I don't want to say being a dick about it, but standing up for himself and saying, hey, I believe this, I stand for this. And that's how his thinking takes him. And he questions his own thinking as well.
The thing about Peter, the thing about Jordan Peterson, when you look at some of the people who were canceled, but then they made careers out of it. I mean, Peter Boghossian has made a career out of this. And certainly Jordan Peterson has made he would have just been a brilliant professor if he didn't get canceled. Now he's, international bestseller, and, who knows how much he charges to even give a talk. So there have been some people who I think have made successes out of this, but we don't know the whole picture. It's hard to tell, how many people who could have lived Peter's exact life, maybe, and just is on the street now, not street epistemology, but just literally, on the street. And we don't know those numbers. No one does. I've actually tried to organize through different agencies, like maybe we could find out these numbers, but it seems like there's very little interest in it.
Well, Jordan Peterson's another interesting case. He was in Columbus last year, and my wife and I went to hear him. We were in the hockey arena, which is a very huge building in Columbus, the professional hockey team. And the thing was about 2/3 full. And, it's dim and the lights are down, and, he's out there, a tiny little thing out there on the stage. And he gave a nice talk. He's pitching his book about the Bible. And so he gave a really nice talk, a Jungian analysis of the Abraham cycle in the book of Genesis. That's what I take. But the phenomenal thing for me was at the end of the lecture, it was time to leave. And of course, I need to go to the restroom. We've been sitting in And there was a line that was a mile long to get into the men's room. There was no line at the women's room. Now, that just doesn't happen in a sports arena, Not really. And I was one of the oldest people there. And so many young guys. And this one guy said, "Oh, that was great." And of course, you're waiting in line, to you go to the urinal. You don't have a conversation or what here. But what was it so great about it? I saw so many young guys. They were there because there's something with magnetic drawing. He had some kind, I don't think just charisma. He had a message of real importance to them. And he was talking about thinking, helping people to think.
And I think that's Bill, I have to say I think you hit the nail on the head, because I think what's going on there, and what I notice with younger people that I'm exposed to, is they get short shrift in the media and in the culture as being just, interested in gadgets. And I know that the older generations, we all whine about the ones coming up. But I think, there's a real desire for substance and for meat and to think about thinking and, the things that matter. And, because they've been fed, especially in this country, a steady diet of frivolous things, with social media and everything else, in schools. Let's face it, the schools have utterly failed to teach people how to think, which there's no other reason to go to school other than to learn how to think. And so, I think that just shows that there are people are hungry for that kind of thing. And he is magnetic and he does have charisma, but that wouldn't sell out an arena or 2/3 of an arena in and of itself if he didn't have something to offer, something substantive. And I think with him, the thing that I find intriguing about him is not that he's putting out there some kind of doctrine or set of beliefs or, set of knowledge even. He's somebody who's on the search, and the search is the thing. I think Walker Percy brought that up in his novel, The Moviegoer. He's talking about the search, to be on the search. That's the thing. And I think what resonates with young men especially is that here's a man at his age, of his accomplishments, who's still searching. And I think that's where the attraction really is, because we're not taught how to search really, or to seek truth or to think. There, at least most places, that's not the goal anymore, if it ever was. So those singular people like him, and Peter Boghossian, Socrates, that we use as examples, I think that's what they're showing us.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Peterson talks about, Peterson talks about writing being the best way to learn how to think. And as I've been getting more into writing and wanting to, publish more stuff, some of my inspiration for writing definitely comes from Peterson's lectures on thinking and the importance of, or I guess not just the importance of learning how to think, but the mental, social, and cultural sharpening of a person when they can actually think and when they can really write something, and the beauty of getting a hold of an idea in a substantial way and championing that. What do you guys are all writers?
That's a fabulous idea what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Really. And before these guys answer that, I just want to say I want to ask each of you, if we kind of close things out here, what might be some guidance you could give to our listening audience about how could they think more about their thinking? And Jordan, you just said writing is one of those things. Okay. And you guys are published authors. So what's your experience on what Jordan just said about writing and thinking?
Well, one of the things about thoughts, and I think this is where we went way off the reality track lately, particularly with wokeism, is that thoughts can do one of two things. They can refer to things in the real world. Those are very useful thoughts. And to the extent that our thoughts reflect the real world, we can use logic to kind of advance our understanding of reality. But thoughts can also just go on to other thoughts, and then they can go to other thoughts. So this is one of the tricks of language that Peterson often talks about with postmodernism. And then all of a sudden, language is an end unto itself. It no longer is a guiding force of reality. It has its own existence that's actually cut off from reality. And that's why we saw very strange things like pronouns. Like people would pick their like I never picked I have no ability to pick a it's a completely strange thing for someone to ask me to pick a pronoun. And the strange thing about it is it didn't seem strange to some people. They just thought, well, I'm just going to pick a pronoun. Like, what do you mean?
It's like, grab the cookie jar of pronouns, and this is the one I am today.
Yes.
My doctor's office asked me that now.
Yeah. And you know, and then,
You have that programmed into the medical software that I work for.
yes.
It's crazy.
But what does it mean? You know, we're taken back to a Socrates-like moment. Like, well, what are you talking about? Like, why do you, like, how can I own a part of language? How can a language represent, like, language doesn't represent, I'm here regardless of what you call me. And there's a great one of the original Star Trek movies where someone used some offensive language, and one of the crew of the Enterprise, they had a great comeback. They're like, in the future, like this was a character from like a long time ago had used some offensive language and he was concerned about it. And they said, look, we no longer are afraid of words. Words can't harm us. Like so in the future, we'll eventually become a species that is, you know, words can't harm us. And so that's something to look forward to. But, you know, right now we're at a really strange time where, you know, and I've pondered this quite a bit when I'm writing or when I'm kind of reflecting on my thinking. Is this a thought that manifests in reality, or is it just something that I've made up? And so it's very easy to get tempted into living a weird existence of language in and of to itself. So it's only language. It no longer refers to reality. It's almost like a schizophrenia of sorts that we experience with wokeism, where language became, people were so obsessed with language. And that obsession still exists to some extent.
Yeah. So Tim, what's your experience about thinking and writing?
Well, I think for me,
Up here.
you know, I always, I mean, I think writing is reflection thinking. So to be able to, and I don't mean just journaling, you know, because you can just do stream of consciousness and that might be, okay, what's in your head, but, you know, actual thinking, I think is, you know, comes out in your writing. And so to write a very clear, solid, crisp, interesting essay or whatever is a function of your thinking. And in my experience, whenever I sit down to write something like that, even something expository, the bulk of the writing was done before I even sat down, you know, because I've thought about it a lot. And if I'm doing like a book review, I've written in the book all up and down the margins. And I think, you know, so you can write, but I think you're a better writer and a better thinker if you're a reader. I don't think you can be a great thinker or a great writer if you don't read. And I think you have to read a lot and read widely. And I think you have to talk to your books, you know, like my marginalia, my books, no one's going to want my books when they die because, you know, you're all marked up. I mean, you know, and I don't mean anything profound. I just mean like I'm engaging with what I'm reading. Yeah. And I write things as I go along. And so I think that kind of dialogue that's happening between me and this great mind that I'm reading is a way it helped me to sharpen how I think and what I think about. And it's just, I don't even think about thinking anymore because I'm automatically doing. When I'm reading, I have a pencil in my hand and I'm just thinking because I'm going back and forth with what I'm reading. And it doesn't seem as cumbersome of, you know, are you subjecting this to the scrutiny of, you know, truth? And are you know, it's not like that, but you do those things. And I think so when you do sit down and write something and you've read a number of books on, and Chris probably knows this better than I do, you know, it tends to come out more organically because you've internalized a lot of the stuff you've read. You've already engaged with it critically and it seems to just flow. And I think that's what people on the outside see. Oh, you're a great writer. You just sit down and it flows out. Writing is painful. I like having written. I don't like writing. It hurts, you know, and a lot of times I feel lazy. I don't want to do it. But that's where how you know, give birth to something more or less, you know, as the Greeks might, you know, say it. Yeah. I think that's important to engage with your reading. You have to read, number one, and then to engage with it in order to sharpen your thinking and improve your writing.
Okay, so maybe we should do a podcast on how to write like that, how to write and think at the same time. Any final thoughts, you guys? This has been a great conversation about thinking, which we could probably do more conversations about. Any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
I'll give you one that I do at the end of every podcast. Don't believe everything you think.
Like, yeah.
That's great.
Well, that's not my truth, so I'm not.
One of the things that I liked from one of the emails that we had going back and forth, I forget who wrote this, but it says, the road to becoming an independent thinker is long and hard, not straight, but it always runs through books, real physical books. And that's probably you, Tim, since you were talking about to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. And over the past few months, I discovered that I read best when I'm reading multiple books at the same time.
Yeah,
and
I agree with that. Yep.
I discovered like a C.S. Lewis and like his whole Inklings movement. Like a lot of people during that time would read like 10 books at a time. And I'm like, that sounds insane. Like probably only guys like C.S. Lewis could do that. And turns out like everybody was reading books that way. Because I mean, it's like,
that's right, George.
It was the entertainment essentially. And so I've been working on doing that. And it's
okay. So maybe one of the ways to think about your thinking is to write, stay off your phone more, engage a book. Yeah. And talk to somebody else that's doesn't think like you, and see what happens.
Yeah, and I think for guys too, I would just say this, Bill, that for guys, I mean, I know some guys are in book clubs. I have a nephew that's in a book club. They read C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and other heavy hitters, Chesterton and that, but a lot of guys, there's a resistance to book clubs because it's been feminized through Oprah and on a popular cultural level, and good, bad, or indifferent, a lot of guys don't want to do that, and you don't have to do it. I don't belong to a book club. I never really have. I mean, I've read some books with you, Bill. I think we've done that with a friend of ours, a while back, and that was a little different because it wasn't a book club. But I think for men, if they can engage with another man about it, absolutely better. Or several men, that's fine. But if you can't, then just do it in your own book. Whether you're reading a man or a female's, work product, just do it within your book. And I think the other thing, Jordan, is a great point about reading multiple books. I've done it for years. Is that especially in this day and age with shorter attention spans that we all have due to the changes in our brains with phones and social media and that. I think reading multiple books is perfectly suited to the moment that we're in because it allows for me to read something, and then if I feel like I'm getting bored with it, I move to something else. And, you don't want to be frenetic about that, but I think that it does allow you to keep reading. There's no excuse not to read. If you're bored with this one book, pick up this other one. If you're not in the mood to read this other one. There's no excuse to not reading. And
okay.
I think that's a good, important point you just made.
Good. Well, this has been a great conversation about how to think about, why every guy should think about the way he thinks. For sure, we give you some ideas about our thinking, but some ideas about what you can do differently. So, Bill Roman here for GuyShrink. Thanks for listening. Check us out on Spotify. And you can always drop me a line at bill@guyshrink.com.